For 5 years, I sent a wire transfer on the first of every single month, and not one person in my family knew my name was attached to it. At Thanksgiving dinner, in front of 31 relatives, my brother stood up, raised his glass, and told everyone that I had never once helped this family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever given everything to people who later pretended you gave nothing at all. My name is Renata. I am 36 years old. I work as a senior structural engineer for a private infrastructure consulting firm, the kind of job that pays well, demands long hours, and rarely gets mentioned at family dinners because nobody in my family has ever fully understood what I do. To them, I am the quiet daughter who moved out early, who never married, who spends too much time on airplanes inspecting bridges and dams in states they cannot find on a map. I am not the golden child. I never was. That title belonged, from the moment he was born, to my younger brother Marcus. Marcus is 32. He is charming in the effortless way that some people simply are, the kind of charm that convinces relatives to forgive him things they would never forgive anyone else. He has a wife, Danielle, and 2 young children, a boy named Theo and a girl named Poppy. He has always had a talent for one specific thing: spending money he did not have and making other people feel responsible for cleaning up the mess afterward. Our parents, Harold and Susan, raised us in a small 3-bedroom house on the edge of a declining steel town, the kind of place where every dollar mattered and every purchase was a negotiation. I grew up watching my mother stretch a single roast across 4 dinners. I grew up understanding in my bones the value of a saved cent. Marcus grew up watching me be told to share, to wait, to go without, so that he could have the newer shoes, the better bicycle, the college fund that miraculously appeared for him and never for me. I am not telling you this to complain about my childhood. I am telling you this because it explains everything that came after. It explains why, when Marcus called me 5 years ago in a state of complete financial collapse, sobbing into the phone that he and Danielle and the children were about to lose their house, some old, worn-down part of me picked up the phone and said, "I'll help. But you cannot tell anyone it was me." That single sentence, that one act of quiet, unconditional love, is the reason I am sitting here tonight writing this story on my laptop instead of sleeping. Because 5 years later, that same brother stood in front of our entire extended family and told them I had never given this family a single thing. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand exactly what I gave up and exactly what I got in return. Chapter 1. The phone call 5 years ago on a rainy Tuesday night in October. My phone rang at 11:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I had been up late finishing a load analysis report for a bridge retrofit project, and the sudden buzz of my phone against the desk startled me so badly I nearly knocked over my coffee. It was Marcus. He never called that late unless something was wrong. "Ren," he said, his voice cracking, "I don't know what to do. I don't know who else to call." I asked him what happened. He told me, in fragments interrupted by long, ragged breaths, that he had co-signed a business loan for a friend's failed restaurant venture 18 months earlier, a loan he had never mentioned to a single person in the family, and the friend had defaulted and disappeared, leaving Marcus personally liable for the entire balance. On top of that, he had fallen behind on his mortgage for 4 months while trying to cover the loan payments, and the bank had sent a formal notice of default. He was 38 days from losing the house he and Danielle had bought 2 years earlier, the house where Theo had just learned to walk and where Poppy had come home from the hospital as a newborn. "Mom and Dad don't have the money," he said. "And even if they did, I can't tell them. Dad will never let me hear the end of it. He'll say I told you so for the rest of my life. Danielle doesn't even know how bad it actually is. She thinks it's just the loan. She doesn't know about the mortgage." I sat there in my quiet apartment, staring at the rain streaking down my window, and I felt the old, familiar pull of responsibility settle over my shoulders like a coat I had worn my entire life. I had spent a decade building a career, saving aggressively, investing carefully, living well below my means specifically because I never wanted to be caught in a moment like this one, powerless against a crisis. I had, at that point, just over $400,000 sitting in a combination of savings and low-risk investment accounts. It was money I had earned through overtime, through certifications I studied for on weekends, through years of turning down vacations so I could max out retirement contributions. It was money that represented my own security, my own future. and I gave a significant portion of it to my brother that same week. "How much do you need," I asked him, "to stop the foreclosure and clear the loan default?" He told me the number. It was substantial. Not catastrophic for me, but substantial enough that writing that check meant delaying my own plans to buy a home by at least 3 years. I did not hesitate for more than a few seconds. I told him I would help on one condition. "You cannot tell Mom. You cannot tell Dad. You cannot tell Danielle's family. Nobody. If this comes out, it has to come from you, in your own time, in your own way. I don't want thanks. I don't want anyone to owe me anything publicly. I just don't want to watch you lose everything you've built." He agreed immediately, gratefully, tearfully. He told me I was saving his family. He told me he would never forget it. He told me he would find a way to pay me back every cent as soon as he got back on his feet. That was the beginning. Chapter 2. The arrangement, what started as a single, one-time rescue, slowly became something much larger and much longer. Marcus's financial habits did not change simply because I had bailed him out once. Within 8 months, he had fallen behind on the mortgage again. This time because Danielle had lost her part-time job and Marcus had, without consulting anyone, purchased a used luxury sedan he could not afford to replace their aging minivan. I found out about the car only after I noticed the mortgage payment had bounced a second time and asked him, point blank, what was happening to the money I had given him. I was furious. I told him, in no uncertain terms, that this could not continue, that I could not simply become his silent financial safety net indefinitely. He apologized. He cried again. He promised it would never happen again. And because I loved him, because I remembered him as a small boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during long car rides, because some part of me still believed that if I just held the family together long enough, everything would eventually stabilize, I agreed to set up what I privately called the arrangement. I would pay his mortgage directly every single month, wired straight from a dedicated account I opened specifically for this purpose, under a business name that had no obvious connection to me. In exchange, Marcus agreed to strict conditions. He was to send me his complete bank statements every month, so I could see exactly where the rest of his income was going. He was to cut up the luxury car's financing agreement and trade it for something reasonable. He was to never, under any circumstances, tell our parents, tell Danielle's parents, tell any relative at all, where the money for the mortgage was coming from. For the first year, he complied with the conditions reasonably well. I watched his statements. I saw the car get traded for something modest. I saw grocery spending stabilize. I began to believe that this arrangement, difficult and unequal as it was actually working, that I was helping him build the discipline he had never been taught as the golden child who never had to want for anything. I remember, during that first year, feeling something close to hope about the whole situation. I would sit with his statements on Sunday evenings, a habit I developed almost like a second job, cross-referencing line items, noting patterns, occasionally sending him gentle, non-judgmental questions about a particular charge. He would respond, usually within a day or two, with explanations that felt honest, sometimes even a little embarrassed, the way people are when they know they are being watched by someone who genuinely wants them to succeed rather than someone looking for an excuse to criticize. There was a stretch of about 14 months, right in the middle of the arrangement, where I genuinely believed we had turned a corner. Marcus picked up a part-time freelance consulting project on top of his regular job, something in his field that paid reasonably well, and for a while, his statements showed him contributing meaningfully toward the mortgage himself, with my payments functioning more as a supplement than the entire load. I remember calling my closest friend, Odalise, during that period and telling her, with real relief in my voice, that I thought the worst of it might finally be behind us, that maybe in another year or two I could quietly step back from the arrangement altogether and Marcus would simply take over completely, the way he always promised he eventually would. That hope did not last. The freelance project ended, as freelance projects often do, without a clear replacement lined up. Marcus, rather than adjusting his household spending downward to match the loss of that supplemental income, simply let his portion of the mortgage responsibility quietly slide back onto me, without ever explicitly telling me that was happening. I only noticed because my scheduled transfer amount, which I had reduced during the 14 months he was contributing, needed to increase again to cover the shortfall, and when I asked him about it, he brushed it off as temporary, Just a rough patch, nothing to worry about. It was, in hindsight, a rough patch that lasted the remaining 3.5 years of the arrangement. But slowly, over the following years, the arrangement began to erode in exactly the way I feared it would. Marcus began taking the fact that his mortgage was covered as a kind of permission to be reckless everywhere else. There were vacations to Cancun that appeared in his statements that he explained away as work bonuses. There were increasingly expensive birthday parties for Theo and Poppy that our parents raved about at every family gathering, praising Marcus and Danielle for being such generous, present parents, never once suspecting that the roof over their heads was being paid for by someone else entirely. I want to be honest with you about something. I do not regret helping my niece and nephew have a stable home. I do not regret keeping a roof over their heads during years when their own father could not manage it. What I regret, what still sits like a stone in my chest even as I write this, is how easily, how casually, my brother allowed his children and his wife to believe that he alone was providing for them, while I disappeared into the background of my own generosity, invisible, unacknowledged, and eventually erased. Chapter 3. The pattern I refuse to see. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes from loving someone your whole life. You see the same behavior repeat itself over and over, and instead of naming it for what it is, you find increasingly creative explanations for why this time will be different. I told myself Marcus was under enormous pressure trying to keep up appearances for Danielle's family, who came from considerably more money than we did. I told myself that once the kids were a little older, once Danielle went back to work full-time, once the economy improved, things would settle. I told myself 100 small lies, and every single one of them was in service of protecting an image of my brother that had stopped being true years earlier, if it had ever been true at all. Meanwhile, my own life quietly shrank around the edges to accommodate this arrangement. I did not buy the house I had been saving for. I delayed a planned career transition that would have required a temporary pay cut because I could not afford to reduce my income while Marcus's mortgage depended on my monthly wire transfer. I dated less, not out of any deliberate choice, but because I found it exhausting to explain a life that was, on paper, financially comfortable but in reality was funneling a significant portion of its comfort into someone else's household every single month. I want to be clear that I never once complained to Marcus about this. I never once made him feel guilty, never once threw the arrangement in his face during an argument, never once hinted to our parents that anything unusual was happening. I kept my word completely. 5 years, 60 consecutive monthly payments, without a single missed transfer, without a single public acknowledgement. I have the bank records. I have every wire transfer confirmation, timestamped and dated, sitting in a folder on my encrypted hard drive, because somewhere in the back of my mind, some quiet, cautious part of me that grew up watching my father demand receipts for every purchase knew that one day I might need proof of what I had done. I never imagined I would need that proof to defend myself against my own brother. Chapter 4. Thanksgiving. This past Thanksgiving, our extended family gathered at my parents' house, which they had recently renovated using a modest inheritance from my late grandmother. There were 31 of us in total, counting cousins, aunts, uncles, and a scattering of family friends who had become fixtures at every holiday gathering over the decades. The dining room table had been extended with 2 folding tables draped in mismatched tablecloths to accommodate everyone, and the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the entire house. I arrived a little later than everyone else, having driven 3 hours from the city after finishing a site inspection that ran long. By the time I walked in, the appetizers were already being cleared and people were finding their seats for the main meal. My mother hugged me at the door, told me I looked tired, and asked, as she always did, when I was finally going to settle down. I smiled the way I always smiled at that question and made my way to the dining room. Marcus was already holding court at the head of the second folding table, a glass of wine in hand, laughing loudly at something one of our uncles had said. Danielle sat beside him, glowing in the way new money sometimes makes people glow, wearing a dress I recognized as considerably more expensive than anything she would have worn 5 years earlier. Theo and Poppy, now 7 and 5, ran between the tables chasing one of our cousin's dogs, shrieking with the particular joy of children who have never known instability. Dinner proceeded the way it always did in our family, loud and overlapping, with 3 or 4 conversations happening simultaneously across the table. I ate quietly, answered polite questions about my job from an aunt who did not really understand what I did but asked out of kindness, and mostly enjoyed simply being present, being surrounded by people, even if I often felt like a background character in my own family story. It was near the end of the meal, as my father stood up to make his traditional toast, that everything changed. My father raised his glass and began, as he did every year, by thanking everyone for coming, by acknowledging how blessed our family was to be together, healthy and well. He then, as he had started doing in recent years, turned the floor over to Marcus, who had apparently taken to giving his own toast at the end of my father's, a small tradition that had developed without me quite noticing when or why. Marcus stood, glass raised, and looked around the table with the confident, easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. I just want to say, he began, that this has been an incredible year for our family. Danielle and I finally paid off the last of our mortgage refinancing early, 6 years ahead of schedule, through nothing but hard work and sacrifice. We did not take a single handout. We built this life ourselves, brick by brick, and I could not be prouder of what we've accomplished as a family on our own. The table erupted into applause. My mother wiped away a proud tear. My father clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Danielle beamed, raising her own glass in agreement. I sat completely still, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth, feeling something cold and sharp settle into my stomach. Paid off the mortgage early? I had wired the payment for that exact mortgage 2 weeks earlier, as I had every month for 5 straight years. There had been no early payoff. There had been no 6 years ahead of schedule achievement. There had been me, alone in my apartment, sending money into an account that Marcus and Danielle had apparently decided, in their own retelling of their lives, they had earned entirely by themselves. I told myself in that first frozen moment that perhaps he simply misspoke. Perhaps he meant something else entirely, some other financial milestone I did not know about. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, because that is what I had always done, because 5 years of silent sacrifice does not disappear from your instincts in a single sentence. But then my cousin Jillian, sitting 2 seats down from me, leaned toward Marcus with genuine curiosity and asked, "That's amazing, Marcus. How did you two manage that?" Renata always says the housing market's been brutal for people your age. And Marcus, without a single flicker of hesitation, without a single glance in my direction, said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life. Honestly, nobody helped us. That's the thing people don't realize. Everyone in this family talks a big game about supporting each other, but when Danielle and I were actually struggling, really struggling, nobody stepped up. Not one person. I had to figure it out completely on my own, working extra hours, taking on side projects, refinancing twice. My own sister lives 40 minutes from us and has more money than she knows what to do with, and in 5 years, she never once offered to help. Not once. So yeah, we did this ourselves because we had to. There was a brief pause at the table. A few relatives glanced at me, mild curiosity flickering across their faces. My mother's expression shifted, just slightly, into something that looked uncomfortably close to disappointment directed at me. My father's jaw tightened. I sat there, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, my hands trembling slightly under the table, and I said absolutely nothing. I did not defend myself. I did not correct him. I simply nodded, took a sip of water, and let the moment pass because I genuinely did not trust my own voice in that instant, and because some deep, ingrained instinct told me that if I revealed the truth right then, in the middle of a holiday dinner, it would look like petty jealousy, like I was trying to steal my brother's moment of pride in front of the entire family. But something inside me broke quietly in that exact moment. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a clean, final crack, the kind that does not make noise but changes the shape of everything afterward. Chapter 5. The drive home, I left the gathering earlier than I normally would have, citing an early morning meeting the next day, which was technically true, though it was not the real reason I wanted to leave. I hugged my parents, hugged the various aunts and uncles, avoided any extended conversation with Marcus, and got into my car. The drive home was 3 hours, and I spent almost the entire time in complete silence. No music, no podcast, just the sound of tires against asphalt and the slow, cold replay of Marcus's words looping through my head. My own sister has more money than she knows what to do with, and in 5 years, She never once offered to help. Not once. I thought about every single wire transfer. Every month I had watched my own savings goals slip further away so that his family could have stability. I thought about the year Danielle had been furious with Marcus over some unrelated argument and had told my mother, within my earshot, that she sometimes felt like nobody in Marcus's family really cared about their financial struggles, that they felt so alone. I remembered sitting there, biting my tongue, saying nothing, because saying something would have violated the exact promise Marcus had asked me to keep. 5 years of silence. 5 years of protecting his image. 5 years of being, quite literally, the invisible foundation holding up a house that my brother now stood in front of our entire family and claimed he had built entirely alone, while simultaneously implying that I had abandoned them in their time of need. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, somewhere around 1 in the morning, I had made a decision. I was done protecting Marcus's pride at the expense of my own truth. I was done being erased from my own sacrifice. But I also knew, with the clear, methodical mind that had built my entire career, that I was not going to handle this with a screaming phone call or an emotional confrontation that Marcus could later twist into a narrative about his bitter, jealous sister. I was going to handle this the way I handled everything in my professional life, with documentation, with precision, and with a plan. Chapter 6. Gathering the evidence the next morning, despite having barely slept, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and began pulling together every piece of financial documentation related to the arrangement. I logged into the dedicated business account I had used for the transfers and downloaded 5 full years of statements, 60 individual monthly wire confirmations, each one timestamped, each one showing the exact amount, the exact recipient account, the exact date. I also pulled up the emails Marcus had sent me over the years, the ones where he had thanked me, tearfully, repeatedly, for saving his family. I found the email from 18 months into the arrangement where he wrote verbatim, "I don't know what we would have done without you, Ren. You saved this family. I mean that. I will never be able to repay you for this." I found another one from just over 2 years ago, where Danielle had unknowingly CC'd me on a message meant for Marcus about the mortgage help from your sister, proof that at some point, at least Danielle had known the truth, even if she had apparently since forgotten or chosen not to mention it during her husband's toast. I organized everything into a single, clean digital folder. Bank statements, wire confirmations, email threads, a simple timeline document I built myself, listing every payment date and amount in chronological order, alongside notes on what other financial event had prompted each payment, the failed restaurant loan, the 4 months of missed payments, the year Danielle lost her job. I did not do this because I wanted to humiliate my brother publicly, not initially. I did it because I needed, for my own sanity, to see the full scope of what I had actually done laid out in front of me in cold, undeniable numbers. Sitting there at my kitchen table, staring at a spreadsheet that showed I had transferred, over 5 years, a total that exceeded $218,000 directly into my brother's mortgage account, I felt something shift inside me from raw hurt into something colder, sharper, and far more resolved. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry in front of him. I was going to make sure that the truth, in its entirety, with every receipt, was finally seen by the people who had spent that Thanksgiving dinner applauding a story that was built on my erasure. Chapter 7. The confrontation I almost didn't have for nearly 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. I said nothing. Marcus called me twice during that period. Both times about unrelated, casual family matters, his tone completely normal, completely unaware that anything had shifted between us. I answered both calls politely, gave short, neutral responses, and did not bring up the toast. I was still deciding during those 2 weeks exactly how I wanted to handle this. Part of me, the part shaped by decades of conflict avoidance and quiet sacrifice, genuinely considered simply letting it go. Simply continuing to be the invisible sister, absorbing the mischaracterization because confronting it felt so exhausting, so certain to blow up into a dramatic family rupture that I would likely be blamed for causing. But then, 12 days after Thanksgiving, my mother called me. She started the conversation warmly enough, asking about work, asking if I had plans for Christmas. And then, in the gentle, probing way mothers sometimes do, she said, "Ren, honey, I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but I've been thinking about what Marcus said at dinner. I know things have been tight for you too, with your job and everything. But is it true that you never offered to help him and Danielle when they were struggling? I just find that surprising because you've always been so generous. But your father mentioned it too, and we've both been a little disappointed, if I'm honest. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and felt the last thread of my restraint finally, quietly snap. Mom, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, I need you to sit down. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. I told her everything. The phone call 5 years ago. The foreclosure notice. The failed restaurant loan. The condition of secrecy Marcus himself had insisted on. The 60 consecutive monthly wire transfers. The total amount. I told her about the email where Marcus had thanked me for saving the family. I told her, calmly, without a single raised word, exactly what had actually happened, in complete contrast to the story her son had told the entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Renata, she finally said, her voice trembling, is this true? All of it? You can send me proof of this. I can send you 5 years of bank statements, Mom. I have every single one. Another long silence. And then, quietly, my mother began to cry. Chapter 8. The family meeting. What happened next was not something I had originally planned, but something my mother, once she understood the full truth, insisted upon. She called my father immediately after hanging up with me, and the two of them, in a rare display of decisive unity, decided that this could not simply be swept under the rug as an awkward misunderstanding. They called Marcus and Danielle and asked them to come to the house that following Sunday, along with me, for what my mother carefully described as a family conversation that needs to happen. I almost did not go. I spent that entire week debating whether confronting this directly was truly the right choice, or whether it would simply detonate a bomb in the middle of my family that I would never be able to fully clean up afterward. But I thought about Thanksgiving, about sitting silently while my own truth was rewritten in front of 31 people, and I knew that if I backed out now, I would be choosing, once again, to disappear. I brought the folder. Printed copies of every wire confirmation, every relevant email, and the timeline document I had built. I did not bring it to weaponize against my brother in some dramatic, theatrical unveiling. I brought it because I knew, from bitter experience, that Marcus had a remarkable talent for reshaping reality when he felt cornered, and I was not going to allow this conversation to become a matter of his word against mine. We gathered in my parents' living room that Sunday afternoon. My mother sat rigid on the edge of the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. My father stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the particular way it always was when he was genuinely angry rather than simply annoyed. Marcus arrived 15 minutes late, Danielle beside him, both of them wearing the slightly confused, slightly defensive expressions of people who suspected they were walking into an ambush, but did not yet know its shape. "What's this about?" Marcus asked, settling into the armchair across from me. Mom said it was important. My father spoke first. "Marcus, your sister has told us something, and before you say anything, I want you to know that she has proof. Real proof. So I would strongly suggest you tell the truth right now, because we are going to find out one way or another." Marcus's easy confidence flickered. Just slightly, a small crack in the surface. "I don't know what you're talking about." I opened the folder. Chapter 9, The Truth. Laid out. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I spoke the way I speak in professional meetings, when I am presenting findings that I know will be unwelcome, but that are, nonetheless, simply true. I laid out the printed wire confirmations on the coffee table, one by one, in chronological order, starting with the very first transfer 5 years ago. "This is the payment that stopped your foreclosure 5 years ago, Marcus. October 22nd. $41,000, wired to clear the loan default and bring your mortgage current. This is the email you sent me 2 days later, thanking me for saving your family and promising you would never forget it." I placed each document down slowly, deliberately, letting the room absorb the weight of it before continuing. Danielle's face had gone pale. My mother had one hand pressed against her mouth. "This is the monthly mortgage payment I wired every single month for the following 5 years. 60 payments total. Here is the timeline document showing every date and amount. Here is Danielle's email from 2 years ago, accidentally CC'd to me, referencing, quote, the mortgage help from your sister. And this, I said, pulling out the final page, is the total sum added up over 5 years. $218,400. The living room was completely silent except for the soft ticking of my parents' old grandfather clock in the corner. I let that silence sit for a long moment before continuing, because I needed my family to fully absorb the weight of the numbers in front of them before I said anything else. I thought about all the times over those 5 years when I had sat quietly through conversations about Marcus's supposed financial discipline, listening to relatives praise his budgeting skills, his work ethic, his ability to provide, while the truth sat locked inside me like a stone I had agreed to swallow. I thought about the birthday parties for Theo and Puppy that had grown more elaborate every year, parties my parents had gushed over, parties that Danielle had proudly posted on social media with captions about how blessed they were to give their children such a wonderful life, never once acknowledging, because she likely did not fully understand it herself, exactly whose sacrifice had made that life financially possible. I want to be clear about something, I continued, my voice still steady, though I could feel my hands trembling slightly where they rested on my knees. I am not angry that Marcus needed help. Everyone needs help sometimes. I am not even angry, not primarily about the money itself, though it was a significant amount of money, and it did cost me real things in my own life that I gave up without ever once complaining about it. What I am angry about, what actually brought me to lay all of this out today, is that Marcus took my silence, a silence he specifically requested, and turned it into a weapon against me. He did not just fail to mention my help. He actively told this family that I refused to give it. He built his own story of self-made success on the exact foundation of my erasure, and then he made sure that erasure reflected badly on me, instead of simply reflecting well on him. You told everyone at Thanksgiving, I continued, still calm, still steady, that you and Danielle paid off your mortgage entirely on your own, 6 years ahead of schedule. You told an entire table of 31 people that I never once offered to help you, that I had more money than I knew what to do with and chose not to share it. Marcus, I have wired you money every single month for 5 straight years. The only reason nobody knew was because you were the one who asked me to keep it secret. Marcus's face had gone through several colors during this recitation. First pale, then a deep, mottled red. That's not, he started, then stopped, then tried again. It wasn't like that. I mean, yes, you helped, but I've contributed so much too. I've worked so hard, you're making it sound like I did nothing. I never said you did nothing, I said. I never once in 5 years told a single person about this arrangement. I never asked for credit. I never asked for thanks. All I asked, the one condition I set, was that you not tell people I refused to help, because I never refused. I gave you everything I had to give for 5 years, and you stood up in front of our entire family and erased it, and worse, you turned it into a story about my failure as a sister. Danielle, sitting beside Marcus, had begun to cry quietly, her hands covering her face. Marcus, she said through her fingers, is this true? All of it. Marcus did not answer her directly. He was staring at the papers spread across the coffee table, his jaw working silently, the confident, easy charm that had carried him through his entire life completely absent from his face for perhaps the first time I could remember. Chapter 10. My father's reaction. My father, who had remained standing by the fireplace throughout my entire presentation, finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, but carrying the particular intensity that had always frightened both Marcus and me as children, though for very different reasons. Marcus, he said, look at me. Marcus looked up. Your sister worked overtime for years to build a career and a savings account, and instead of buying herself a home, instead of taking the vacations you and Danielle took, instead of living the life she had earned, she spent that money keeping a roof over your children's heads. And you stood in this house's dining room and told this entire family that she never helped you. You let your mother believe that her daughter was selfish. You let 31 relatives believe a lie that made you look like a self-made success while your sister sat there and said nothing because she was protecting a promise she made to you. Dad, I am not finished. My father's voice did not rise, but it hardened, each word landing like a stone. I have spent 32 years watching this family favor you, Marcus. I know we did it. I know your mother and I made choices when you two were growing up that put more resources toward you than toward Renata, because you always seemed like you needed more help, and she always seemed like she could manage on her own. I see now very clearly exactly what that pattern has cost her and exactly what it has allowed you to become. My mother, still crying quietly on the couch, reached over and took my hand. Renata, she said, I am so sorry. I said something to you on the phone that I should never have said. I doubted you because your brother told a more convincing story, and that is my failure as much as his. I am so sorry. I squeezed her hand but said nothing. I had not come to this family meeting seeking apologies from my parents. I had come because I refused to let a lie about my own life stand uncorrected. Whatever came next, whatever my parents decided to do with this information, was, in some sense, secondary to the simple fact that the truth was now on the table, documented, undeniable, impossible for Marcus to argue away with charm. Chapter 11. Danielle's discovery. What happened over the following hour, after the initial shock had settled, was in some ways more painful to witness than the confrontation itself. Danielle, once she had absorbed the full scope of what her husband had hidden from her, began asking her own questions. Questions that revealed just how much Marcus had kept from her over the years. Questions that had nothing to do with me at all. The failed restaurant loan, she said slowly, staring at Marcus. You told me that was $7,000. You told me your parents helped cover part of it. Danielle, how much was it actually? Marcus did not answer. I glanced down at my folder, at the original wire confirmation, and quietly slid it toward her. Danielle read the number, her face draining further of color. $41,000, she whispered. You told me it was 7. You told me it was almost nothing. I thought we were fine within a few months. I had no idea we were about to lose the house. I had no idea any of this happened. I didn't want you to worry, Marcus said, his voice small now, stripped of its earlier confidence. I was trying to protect you. You weren't protecting me, Danielle said, her voice rising for the first time. You were protecting yourself. You let me believe we built this life together, just the two of us working hard, making smart choices, and the entire time your sister was quietly bailing us out, and you let me stand in front of my own parents and brag about how well we were doing financially, how proud I was of you, while you knew none of it was really ours to be proud of. The conversation, at this point, expanded well beyond me and became something between Marcus and Danielle, a reckoning about years of financial secrecy within their own marriage that had nothing to do with the wire transfers I had made and everything to do with the pattern of dishonesty Marcus had built his entire adult life around. I sat quietly, watching my brother's carefully constructed image collapse in real time, and felt surprisingly, not triumph, but a strange, hollow kind of sadness. I had not wanted this. I had not wanted Danielle to discover the full extent of her husband's deception, had not wanted to be the catalyst for what was clearly about to become a much larger reckoning within their marriage. I had simply wanted my parents, my family, to know the truth about my own actions. But the truth, once it is finally allowed into a room, has a way of illuminating far more than the single lie you originally set out to correct. Chapter 12. What Marcus said next. After nearly 2 hours of increasingly difficult conversation, Marcus finally turned to me directly, his eyes red, his posture defeated in a way I had genuinely never witnessed from him before. I don't even know what to say, he said. I know I can't undo what I said at Thanksgiving. I know I can't undo 5 years of not telling people the truth. I think, honestly, part of me convinced myself that if I told people you were helping us, it would somehow make me look weak, like I couldn't handle my own family. And the longer I let people believe I was doing it all myself, the harder it became to ever correct it. It just kept snowballing. And then at Thanksgiving, when Jillian asked, I panicked, and instead of finally telling the truth, I made it worse. I made it so much worse. I turned you into the villain instead of admitting I was the one who needed saving. I looked at my brother, really looked at him for a long moment. Some part of me wanted badly to simply accept the apology, to fold back into the familiar role of forgiving him, smoothing things over, protecting the peace the way I always had. But another part of me, the part that had spent 5 years disappearing into the background of my own family's story, knew that an apology offered only after being caught with irrefutable evidence was not the same thing as genuine accountability. I believe that you're sorry you got caught, I said quietly. I'm not sure yet whether you're sorry for what you actually did. Those are different things, Marcus. And I think it's going to take a lot more than one conversation for me to know which one this is. Chapter 13. The weeks that followed and the weeks after that family meeting, the fallout rippled through our extended family in ways I had not fully anticipated. My mother, in a decision that surprised me, told several of the relatives who had been present at Thanksgiving the actual truth, not to humiliate Marcus further, she said, but because she refused to let a lie about her own daughter continue circulating unchallenged among people she loved. Word spread, as it always does in large families, and within a month, most of our relatives knew the real story. Some of them reached out to me directly. My Aunt Bethany called and told me she had cried after hearing what I had actually done, that she had always thought of me as the quiet, reserved one in the family, and had no idea I had been carrying that kind of weight silently for 5 years. My cousin Jillian, the one whose innocent question at Thanksgiving had inadvertently started this entire unraveling, sent me a long, heartfelt message apologizing for having unknowingly put me in that position, though I told her, honestly, that she had done nothing wrong. She had simply asked a reasonable question and received a dishonest answer. Marcus and Danielle's marriage entered a difficult period that I largely stayed out of, though I heard, through my mother, that they had begun seeing a financial counselor together, working through not just the debt but the years of secrecy that had accumulated around it. I do not know, even now, exactly where their marriage stands, though the last I heard, they were still together, working through it, which I suppose is its own kind of accountability, even if it was forced into existence by discovery rather than chosen freely. As for the arrangement itself, I made a decision that I know some people might find harsh, but that felt, to me, like the only reasonable path forward. I stopped the monthly transfers entirely. Not out of spite, not to punish my niece and nephew, but because I could no longer justify sacrificing my own financial future to sustain a household built on a foundation of secrecy and, ultimately, betrayal. I told Marcus directly, calmly, that I would help him set up a realistic budget and a plan to take over the mortgage payments himself, that I would connect him with resources and even offer temporary bridge assistance during the transition if he demonstrated genuine, sustained effort. But the era of silent, unconditional, uncredited support was over. Chapter 14. Rebuilding my own life. What surprised me most in the months that followed was how much space opened up in my own life once I stopped funneling a significant portion of my income into someone else's household every month. I had grown so accustomed to the arrangement that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to save purely for myself. I finally began seriously looking at houses, something I had put off for 5 years without ever fully articulating why. I found a small, well-built 2-bedroom home about 20 minutes outside the city, with good bones and a garden that badly needed attention but that I found myself, for the first time in years, genuinely excited to restore. I put in an offer within a month of officially deciding to buy, using savings I had been slowly rebuilding since ending the arrangement, savings that no longer disappeared silently into an account I never spoke of. I also, for the first time in longer than I care to admit, began dating again. Not with any particular urgency, but simply because I found myself with actual mental and emotional space to consider what I wanted from my own life, rather than constantly triaging everyone else's crises. I met someone, a civil engineer named Desmond, through a mutual colleague, and while it is still early, I find myself, for the first time in years, imagining a future that centers my own happiness rather than my usefulness to other people. I do not say any of this to suggest that ending the secret financial support for Marcus fixed everything instantly, or that I emerged from this experience without lingering pain. I still, on certain days, feel a flash of old anger when I think about that Thanksgiving toast, about 31 people applauding a story that erased 5 years of my life. I still, occasionally, catch myself falling into old patterns of minimizing my own needs in favor of other people's comfort. Healing from a lifetime of being the invisible, dependable one is not a single dramatic confrontation followed by instant transformation. It is a slow, ongoing practice of choosing again and again to value my own truth as much as I have always valued everyone else's comfort. There were moments in that first year after ending the arrangement when old guilt crept back in uninvited, usually late at night, usually after a phone call with my mother in which she mentioned, almost in passing, some small struggle Marcus and Danielle were having with the children's school expenses or a car repair they were stretching to afford. I would feel the familiar pull, that automatic reflex toward rescue that had been trained into me since childhood, and I would have to consciously remind myself that helping occasionally, transparently, with clear boundaries, was an entirely different thing from the silent, boundless, uncredited arrangement I had maintained for 5 years. I was allowed to say no. I was allowed to let Marcus sit with the discomfort of his own financial choices without immediately absorbing that discomfort into my own body the way I had for so long. Learning to tolerate that discomfort in myself without collapsing back into old patterns has been, honestly, one of the harder ongoing projects of my adult life. Chapter 15, a different kind of family gathering this past holiday season. Nearly a year after that fateful Thanksgiving, our family gathered again, this time for a smaller, quieter Christmas dinner at my parents' house. Marcus and Danielle were there, along with Theo and Poppy, though the atmosphere was noticeably different from previous years, more subdued, more careful, in the particular way families become after a significant rupture has forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. At one point during dinner, my father raised his glass for the traditional toast, and this time he did not turn the floor over to Marcus. Instead, he looked directly at me. "I want to say something," he said, "about my daughter. For a long time, I think this family, myself included, took Renata's strength for granted. We assumed that because she never asked for help, because she never made a scene, because she handled everything quietly and competently, that she did not need to be seen, did not need to be thanked, did not need her sacrifices acknowledged the way we so readily acknowledged everyone else's. That was wrong, and I am sorry for my part in it. Renata, you have given this family more than any of us fully understood for a very long time, and I want you to know, in front of everyone here, that we see it now. We see you." I sat there, glass in hand, feeling tears I had not expected well up in my eyes. It was not the grand, dramatic vindication of some movie ending. It was simply my father, finally, after decades of an imbalanced family dynamic, saying the words I had not realized I had been quietly waiting my entire life to hear. Marcus, sitting across the table, met my eyes briefly and nodded, a small, genuine gesture that felt more honest than the elaborate apology he had offered in the immediate aftermath of being caught months earlier. We are not, even now, fully repaired as siblings. Trust, once broken as thoroughly as it was broken that Thanksgiving, does not simply snap back into place because enough time has passed. But there is, at least, an honesty between us now that did not exist before, an acknowledgement on both sides of exactly what happened and exactly what it cost. After dinner, as people began clearing plates and the children begged to open presents early, my mother pulled me aside into the kitchen, away from the noise, and hugged me longer than she normally would have. She did not say anything elaborate. She simply held on, the way she used to when I was small and had scraped a knee or lost a spelling contest, the particular embrace of a mother who understands, finally and completely, that her child needed protecting in ways she had not noticed for far too long. I stood there in that warm, cluttered kitchen, surrounded by the smell of cinnamon and roasting chestnuts, and felt something in my chest loosen that had been tightly wound for 5 long years. Chapter 16, the lawyer's office. I have not mentioned yet the role that a lawyer played in all of this, because for a long time I was reluctant to admit, even to myself, that at one point during those 5 years, I had gone so far as to consult an attorney about formalizing the arrangement with Marcus. It happened about 2.5 years into the payments, at a point when I had started to feel a low, persistent unease about the sheer scale of what I was doing without any legal protection whatsoever. Her name was Priyanka Desai, a family and financial law attorney a colleague had recommended after a casual conversation about estate planning turned, almost accidentally, into me admitting that I had been quietly supporting a family member's mortgage for over 2 years. Priyanka listened to my situation with the calm, unhurried patience of someone who had clearly heard every version of family financial entanglement imaginable, and at the end of my explanation, she leaned back in her chair and asked me a question that I have thought about many times since. "Do you want this money back eventually? Or is this, in your mind, a gift?" I remember sitting there, genuinely unsure how to answer. Part of me wanted to say it was purely a gift, an act of unconditional love that required no repayment, because that felt like the more noble, more generous answer. But another part of me, the practical engineer's part of my mind, understood that if I truly wanted no repayment at all, I would not have felt the need to sit in a lawyer's office asking about my options. "I don't know," I finally admitted. "I think I want the option to ask for it back someday, if things ever get to a point where I genuinely need it. But I don't want to make Marcus feel like he's living under a debt collector's shadow either." Priyanka drafted, at my request, A simple private loan agreement, structured so that the monthly mortgage payments would technically count as a personal loan disbursement, with no interest, no fixed repayment schedule, but a formal acknowledgement on paper that this was money owed, not simply gifted. She advised me strongly to have Marcus sign it, explaining that even informal family loans benefit enormously from documentation, both for tax purposes and for the simple, sobering reason that family relationships sometimes fracture, and when they do, verbal agreements tend to be remembered very differently by each party. I brought the document to Marcus during one of our monthly check-in calls, framing it gently, telling him it was mostly for my own peace of mind, nothing that would change our arrangement in any practical way. He read through it, and I remember the flicker of something across his face, something between discomfort and offense, before he agreed to sign it. "You don't trust me," he said quietly, signing his name at the bottom of the page. "It's not about trust," I told him. "It's about making sure that whatever happens between us, personally, financially, in the future, we both have the same understanding of what actually happened here. That protects both of us, Marcus. Not just me." I did not fully appreciate at the time how important that single piece of paper would become. When I sat in my parents' living room laying out 5 years of evidence, that signed loan agreement, dated and notarized, was among the most powerful documents in my folder, because it was not simply my word, my bank statements, my unilateral account of events. It was Marcus's own signature, acknowledging in writing exactly what the arrangement was and exactly how much he had received. Chapter 17. The extended family reacts in the weeks following the family meeting. As word gradually spread beyond my immediate family circle, I found myself fielding an unexpected volume of messages, calls, and even a few unannounced visits from relatives who felt compelled to weigh in, each in their own particular way, on what had happened. My uncle Desmond, my father's older brother, called me directly, something he had not done in years, to tell me a story I had never heard before about a similar situation decades earlier involving his own younger brother, my father, when they were both young men. He told me that he had once quietly covered several months of my father's rent during a rough patch early in his marriage to my mother, and that my father had, in a moment of youthful insecurity, allowed people to believe he had managed entirely on his own. "It runs in families sometimes," my uncle said. "Not the dishonesty exactly, but the instinct to protect your pride even when it costs someone else theirs." I never said anything back then either. I think I understand, more than most people in this family probably do, exactly what you're feeling right now. That conversation meant more to me than I expected it to. It was the first time someone in my family had framed what happened not simply as an isolated betrayal by Marcus, but as part of a larger, generational pattern that had quietly shaped how our family handled financial vulnerability and pride for decades. It did not excuse what Marcus had done, but it helped me understand it as something learned, something absorbed, rather than something uniquely cruel about my brother's character. My cousin Teresa, on the other hand, took a considerably harder line. She had always been close with Danielle, and in the aftermath of the revelation, she stopped speaking to Marcus almost entirely for several months, telling me directly that she found his behavior unforgivable and that she intended to make her feelings known at every future family gathering, whether he liked it or not. I found myself, somewhat to my own surprise, gently discouraging this kind of ongoing hostility, not because I wanted to protect Marcus, but because I had come to realize that my goal had never been to destroy my brother socially. My goal had simply been to reclaim my own truth. Watching other people weaponize that truth into a prolonged campaign of public shaming against him felt, uncomfortably, like it was drifting away from what I actually wanted, which was accountability, not permanent exile. I remember telling Teresa during a long phone call, "I appreciate you being angry on my behalf, I really do. But I don't need Marcus punished forever. I need him to understand what he did, and I need our family to know the truth. Those are different things than wanting him cast out." Chapter 18. A conversation with Theo. Perhaps the most unexpectedly difficult moment in the entire aftermath came several months later, during a smaller family gathering when my nephew Theo, then 8 years old, asked me a question that none of the adults in the family had quite prepared me for. We were sitting together on the back porch of my parents' house while the adults talked inside, and Theo, who had clearly picked up fragments of adult conversation he did not fully understand, looked up at me and asked, "Aunt Ren, did you buy our house?" I was quiet for a moment, trying to figure out how to answer a question like that honestly, without burdening an 8-year-old with the full emotional weight of adult financial betrayal, but also without lying to him the way his own father had, in a sense, lied to him by omission for years. "I helped your mom and dad be able to keep the house you grew up in," I finally said. "A long time ago, when you were very little, things were hard for your family, and I was able to help. That's something families do for each other sometimes." Theo considered this with the particular seriousness that young children sometimes bring to conversations they sense are important, even if they cannot fully articulate why. "Dad said we did it all by ourselves," he said. "Is that not true?" I chose my words carefully. "Your dad worked very hard too, Theo. He worked a lot of extra hours, and your mom worked hard as well. But sometimes when people are struggling, families help each other, and there's nothing wrong with needing help. I think your dad just forgot for a little while to say thank you for the help he got, but he knows now. And I know he loves you and your sister very much, and everything he did, even the mistakes, came from wanting to take care of you." Theo nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with this answer, and went back to playing with the small toy truck he had brought outside with him. But that conversation stayed with me for weeks afterward. A reminder that the consequences of Marcus's dishonesty had rippled outward further than I had originally considered, touching even his own children's understanding of their family's story. Chapter 19. Danielle's own reckoning. Over the following months, Danielle and I developed a friendship that neither of us had anticipated, born out of the shared, uncomfortable experience of having been deceived, in different ways, by the same man. During one of our coffee conversations, roughly 8 months after the initial confrontation, Danielle told me something that added an entirely new layer of understanding to everything that had happened. "I want you to know," she said, turning her cup slowly in her hands, "that I actually didn't know about the mortgage help. Not the full amount, not for years, but I knew early on that Marcus's sister had helped us with something. He told me himself, in the very beginning, right after the foreclosure was stopped." I stared at her, genuinely surprised. "Then why did you let him say what he said at Thanksgiving? Why did you sit there and applaud?" Danielle's eyes filled with tears. "Because somewhere along the way, he convinced me that it was better not to bring it up, that it embarrassed him, that talking about it made him feel small in front of the family. And I loved him, and I didn't want him to feel small, so I just stopped mentioning it. And then enough time passed that it started to feel like ancient history. Something that had happened once, a long time ago, not something that was still actively happening every single month. I genuinely did not realize until you laid out those bank statements that it had continued for the entire 5 years. I thought it was a one-time thing. I thought we really had been managing on our own since then." This revelation complicated my feelings toward Danielle in ways I am still, honestly, working through. On one hand, I understood deeply the particular pressure of protecting someone else's pride at the expense of the truth, because I had spent 5 years doing exactly that. On the other hand, some part of me could not fully shake the sting of realizing that Danielle, too, had sat silently through years of gatherings where credit for my sacrifice was quietly, casually redirected elsewhere, and had chosen comfort over correction. "I'm not telling you this to excuse what I did," Danielle said, seeming to sense my complicated reaction. "I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know the whole truth, even the uncomfortable parts. I let a lie get bigger and bigger because correcting it always felt harder than just letting it continue for one more day. And then one more day became years. I understand now how badly that hurt you, and I am genuinely deeply sorry for my part in it." I appreciated her honesty, even though it complicated the tidy narrative I might have preferred, one where Marcus alone was the villain and everyone else around him was simply an unknowing bystander. The truth, as it so often is, turned out to be messier, more human, distributed across multiple people who each, in their own way, chose the comfort of silence over the discomfort of correction, until the weight of that accumulated silence finally became too heavy to sustain. Chapter 20. What accountability actually looked like. I want to be honest about something else, because I think it matters for anyone listening to this story who might expect a cleaner, more satisfying arc of villain gets punished, hero gets vindicated storytelling. Marcus was not, in the aftermath of all this, cast out of the family, stripped of his job, or dramatically ruined the way certain other family betrayal stories you might have seen play out. His accountability looked much quieter, much slower, much more mundane than that. He and Danielle did eventually complete the financial counseling program they started. Marcus took on a second part-time consulting role in addition to his regular job, specifically to accelerate paying down the remaining debt from the failed restaurant loan, debt that, it turned out, had never been fully resolved despite my years of mortgage support, simply restructured and pushed further into the future. He began, for the first time in longer than I could remember, sending me his budget voluntarily, not because I asked him to, but because he told me he wanted to prove, slowly, over time, that he understood what accountability actually required. I do not know if I have fully forgiven my brother, even now. I think forgiveness, real forgiveness, is a much slower, more complicated process than the tidy resolution scenes we sometimes expect from stories like this one. What I can say is that I no longer carry the specific, sharp anger I felt in the weeks following that Thanksgiving dinner. It has settled into something more like a permanent, quiet caution, an awareness that I love my brother, that I likely always will, but that loving him does not require me to ever again disappear into the silent, uncredited role I occupied for 5 years of my life. Chapter 21. What I have learned, if there is a lesson in everything I have shared with you tonight, it is not simply that silent sacrifice invites exploitation, though there is certainly truth in that. It is something a little more specific, a little harder to summarize neatly. I learned that love, real love, the kind that asks nothing in return, is not the same thing as erasure. I spent 5 years believing that the most generous version of love was the invisible version, the version that gave everything and demanded nothing, not even acknowledgement. I believed that keeping my brother's secret, protecting his pride at the expense of my own truth, was simply what good sisters did. What I understand now is that there is a difference between generosity and self-erasure. Generosity says, I will help you freely, because I love you. Self-erasure says, I will help you, and I will also disappear so completely that you can rewrite the story of your own life without any trace of my contribution ever surfacing. I gave Marcus generosity for 5 years. What he took from it, without my full awareness until it was almost too late, was permission for self-erasure, permission to build a version of his own success that required my complete invisibility. I do not regret helping keep a roof over my niece and nephew's heads during those years. I will never regret that. What I regret is how long it took me to understand that protecting someone's pride and protecting the truth are not always the same thing, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and ultimately for the people you love, is to refuse to disappear any longer, even when disappearing has become the most familiar, most comfortable shape of your own life. To anyone watching this who recognizes themselves in my story, who has spent years being the quiet, dependable one while someone else took credit for your sacrifices, I want you to hear this clearly. Your generosity does not require your erasure. You are allowed to help the people you love and still insist on being seen. You are allowed to keep a promise of secrecy right up until the moment that secrecy is weaponized against your own truth. And when that moment comes, you are allowed, finally, to speak. Thank you for listening to my story tonight. If it resonated with you, if you have ever given more than you were ever thanked for, let me know in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more stories like this one. Epilogue. It has been 14 months now since that Thanksgiving dinner. My house, the small one with the garden that needed attention, has slowly become a home in the truest sense, filled with plants I have learned to keep alive, a life I built deliberately and visibly, no longer folded quietly into someone else's story. Marcus continues to make his own mortgage payments now, sometimes on time, sometimes a few days late, but always at least his own, earned through his own effort, owned by his own name. Danielle and I have grown, unexpectedly, closer than we ever were before, bonded in some strange way by the shared experience of having been kept in the dark by the same man for different reasons. We have coffee occasionally now, something we never did in the earlier years of her marriage to my brother, when I was too busy quietly funding their household to build any real relationship with her beyond polite family gatherings. My parents, particularly my father, make a visible, consistent effort now to acknowledge the things I do, the ways I show up, in a manner they simply never did before. It is a small thing, being seen by your own family after decades of quiet invisibility, but it has changed something fundamental in how I move through the world. I no longer assume that my contributions will go unnoticed unless I make noise about them. I no longer believe that the price of love is silence. Marcus and I are rebuilding something, slowly, carefully, in the particular way siblings rebuild trust after it has been genuinely, deeply broken. We are not who we were before that Thanksgiving dinner, and I have come to believe that this is not entirely a bad thing. We are more honest with each other now than we ever managed to be during the years when I was quietly saving him, and he was quietly allowing himself to believe, or at least to pretend, that he did not need saving at all. There is a particular ritual we have developed over these past several months, one I did not expect and one that, honestly, still catches me off guard with how much it means to me. On the first Sunday of every month, Marcus calls me, not to ask for anything, but simply to walk me through his budget, unprompted, the way he once dreaded doing when I required his bank statements as a condition of the arrangement. He tells me what he paid the mortgage that month, tells me if anything unexpected came up, tells me, sometimes with visible discomfort, when he made a purchase he probably should not have made. I do not lecture him. I do not need to anymore. I simply listen because I understand now that what he is actually offering me in those monthly calls is the transparency he withheld for 5 straight years, offered freely now instead of extracted through crisis and confrontation. Danielle has begun slowly to build her own career back up, taking a position at a local nonprofit that handles financial literacy education for young families, a job she told me she was drawn to specifically because of everything our family went through. I want to help people understand these patterns before they become 5 years deep, she told me one afternoon, and I remember feeling a quiet, unexpected pride in her for choosing to turn something so painful into something genuinely useful for other people. My own house has become, over this past year, something I genuinely love returning to at the end of long workdays. The garden, which I inherited in a state of complete neglect, now has raised beds along the back fence where I grow tomatoes and herbs I never had the time or the settled sense of home to grow before. Desmond, the man I mentioned earlier, has become a steady, grounding presence in my life, someone who, notably, has never once asked me to minimize my own needs in order to make him more comfortable, which I have come to understand, only in hindsight, was an entirely reasonable baseline to expect from a partner, not some extraordinary standard I should feel grateful to receive. I think often about the version of myself who sat in that kitchen 5 years ago, listening to my brother sob into the phone at 11:42 at night, and who agreed, almost instantly, to give away a significant portion of her hard-earned savings in exchange for nothing but silence and a vague promise of eventual repayment. I do not regret that woman's generosity. I have made peace with her choices, even the ones that cost me years of delayed dreams and quiet, uncredited sacrifice. But I have also learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, to ask a question that woman never thought to ask herself. What happens to me, to my own future, my own security, my own sense of being seen, if I keep giving in silence forever? I do not have a perfect answer for how to balance generosity with self-protection. I suspect nobody truly does, and that every family, every relationship, requires its own constant, imperfect recalibration of those two competing values. What I do know with complete certainty now is that generosity without honesty is not sustainable, not for the giver, and ultimately, not even for the person receiving it. Marcus did not become more capable, more resilient, or more honest during the years when I quietly absorbed the consequences of his instability. If anything, the silence I maintained allowed those patterns to deepen, to calcify, until they exploded outward in the most painful way possible, at a dinner table, in front of everyone we love. If you take one thing away from my story, let it be this: the people who truly love you will not need your invisibility in order to feel proud of themselves. And if you find yourself disappearing again and again into someone else's success story, it may be time, as it was for me, to finally step back into the light of your own truth, no matter how long you have hidden from it, and no matter how uncomfortable the reckoning might be. I want to leave you with one final thought, something my mother said to me on the phone recently, months after everything had settled into this new, more honest version of our family. She told me that she had started noticing, in small ways she had never paid attention to before, all the quiet contributions I made that had simply blended into the background of family life for years. The times I drove 3 hours to help my father recover after a minor surgery. The times I quietly paid for a cousin's flight home for a funeral when money was tight. The countless small, uncredited acts of care that I had simply never thought to mention because mentioning them had never occurred to me as something I was allowed to do. I think, my mother said, that we raised you to believe that the highest form of love was the kind nobody had to know about. And I am starting to understand that we were wrong. Real love can be loud sometimes, Renata. It's allowed to be seen. I carry those words with me now, into every relationship, every act of generosity, every quiet decision to help someone I love. I still believe deeply in giving without keeping score, in helping people without demanding constant recognition for every kindness. But I no longer believe that love requires my complete erasure in order to remain genuine. I no longer believe that the truest measure of my devotion to the people I love is how completely I can disappear on their behalf. Never shrink yourself to protect someone else's pride at the cost of your own worth. You deserve to be seen for everything you have given, not despite your silence, but because your silence was never meant to be permanent. And when the moment finally comes to speak, as it eventually comes for all of us who have carried something heavy and unacknowledged for far too long, I hope you find, as I did, that the truth, however uncomfortable, however disruptive to the comfortable stories other people have built around your silence, is always, always worth telling. Take a moment today to look honestly at the relationships in your own life and ask yourself, gently but truthfully, whether there is a place where your generosity has quietly slipped into self-erasure. If there is, know that it is never too late to reclaim your own story, to insist, finally and without apology, on being seen for exactly what you have given and exactly who you are. Thank you again for spending this time with my story. Wherever you are watching from tonight, whatever quiet sacrifice you may be carrying that no one else fully sees, I hope you remember that your worth was never meant to depend on your invisibility, and that somewhere, someday, the truth you have been holding will finally find its moment to be spoken and heard and honored. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other honestly, speak your truth before it has to be discovered by accident, and I will see you all again very soon in the next story.